Hi everybody, this is Morné here, and
I'm Duncan. Good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. What we're doing is what we probably refer to as our first God's Better Story podcast.
So isn't this like our first ever podcast?
Probably a first ever. We tried an AI podcast one time, which wasn't good. But anyway, we'll talk about that other time.
We'll get to AI.
Yeah,
it's a whole
another podcast. However, we just thought, if you're logging in and you don't know us or anything like that, we are started the series called God's Better Story, and really looking at this whole topic about gender, sexuality stuff. So we've now basically done, I think, 4 sessions or so, and we just thought what we're going to do is we're just going to have a moment to reflect on some of the sessions, probably from the first session, and then get to where we are currently. Yeah. And I think it was just a good opportunity for us to give some of our perspective, some of our reflections. What we think. We hear different things from different people, like what they're wrestling with, which is fantastic. I think it's really good, isn't it?
It's been very good.
People are in connect groups where they're also having these conversations. So I thought, Duncan and I will just have a conversation. You guys can watch in, and then you can hear, and hopefully you found it helpful.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. So number 1, I thought we'll start with the session, which was the story we're living in, setting out the culture and all that kind of stuff. We had Truth and Grace. We had an evening with Mick Taylor on biblical position on homosexuality. Then we had David Bennett that came and did basically the age of sexuality, telling his story. An evening seminar on that as well. And then last week we did the story about the position of our bodies in today's culture. So that's basically the run so far. So I don't know, what was your...
I'm learning.
You're learning.
I'm realizing that. It's just the more I'm thinking about stuff, I'm thinking, what do I think about that? And I think one of the big learnings for me has been, I think sometimes the framework feels simple. What do we think the Bible teaches on certain things? For example, Mick Taylor's session. So taking that kind of biblical framework for how we see homosexuality. The pastoral application of it, complex. So I don't know what you thought when we had people in the church kind of just coming up, asking questions. In terms of their real lived experience. It's then like, wow, how do we work this out? So,
they were authentic and stuff. I mean, has there been, what's one thing so far that you think has been the most intriguing thing for you so far from the series?
I think having David Bennett with us was fascinating to me. I'd heard him speak at West Point back in the
Did
day.
you?
Probably.
Did you go to that seminar?
Yeah. So
okay. I never got to that seminar.
So maybe, I don't know what that was, maybe 5 years ago. But I think some of what his I think a couple of things. One is the staggering nature of God's love and God's relentless pursuit of all people from all backgrounds. I mean, it's stunning. He's just started his book War of Love. Have you read that? Yeah. So
I did cram read it, to be fair, over a week.
That's impressive.
But it was actually in some ways helpful, because it made me like focus on the story in a very intensive way, read it very I suppose quickly, but also like covering a lot of ground. And then you get like the intensity of, like that point about God's love, the pursuit of God's love in there. I think that's what comes. If you haven't read the book, I would recommend reading it, War of Loves, David Bennett. I think it's very authentic though.
And I think for me, what struck me is this is someone who's got hold of the gospel. So that evening session when he spoke, almost if you haven't watched the morning, sorry, if you were at the morning, you've got to catch up with the evening. I think that's online, isn't it?
It's all online, ready for on our website.
So it just felt like part A, part B. It just felt like you've got to do both. But the authenticity in that session, and like those things that he said about his own experience and stuff that he'd done and seen, and this guy has got hold of the gospel, which I think is some of the challenge, in the sense of he's living so authentically free. He's like, what does that look like? I know you thought like, I'm a gay Christian, so that's a statement out there. Living for holiness, celibate, single, but saying that, I don't think he was saying it's my identity, but this kind of thing around what I'm calling myself that.
I find that, and I really don't know what I think about it. I keep wrestling with the idea
Yeah.
Because the thing is, it's not. I don't say, "Hey, I'm a heterosexual Christian."
Yeah.
But then when we had lunch together, he would say the reason he would do that is because you are the majority.
Right.
So you're always going to be
Yeah.
heterosexual in most spaces, the majority in most spaces.
Yeah.
And therefore you are the minority. And so you actually identifying yourself as something that is a minority group, which is quite, I still don't understand why that is important.
Yeah.
Like why that would be something because that's not my experience, of course, or my life. But so identifying yourself as anything other than just I'm a Christian, I wrestle with that, but I'm not judging him.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to understand more why.
Yeah, because and again we talked about this, haven't we? Because it's been interesting to me to ask different people in the church, because that's where I spend most of my chatting to people in the church, saying what was what did you hear, what did you understand, what were you wrestling with? Because I think, I mean, it's a side issue, but an important one. How do you have those conversations healthily and disagree?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that was good, and then
without becoming enemies.
Yes.
So disagreeing without being like, now I'm no longer friends with you is weird.
It is a strange approach, because it's like we could disagree on the things, and you think, and they're important things because they come back to the nature of discipleship, the authority of Scripture. They're really key things, but we have to be able to disagree well. And then, what's the process of someone who gets saved, who's someone who's homosexual gets saved? What's the process of sanctification, of discipleship? So we talked a lot about the degree of his willingness to say I'm a gay Christian. There's all sorts of language things around that. I think my experience growing up was, if you said you were gay, you were living actively gay.
Right.
So there was a language thing for me to ask questions.
Meaning you are having sexual practice with another person of the same sex. So that's equal. That's your definition of gay.
Yeah. So if someone said I'm gay, I'd be like, so I'm freaking out. So I mean, I've done some of this thinking before he got on the platform and spoke, but that's interesting generationally for me. That was those words meant that. So I'm having to process that and think, oh, you don't mean that. You mean there's a same-sex attraction thing going on. So there's a thing about desire and a warpness of that desire that you talked about. So there's that going on. But there's also this phrase he used. What was it? Fabulous and glorious.
Fabulous made glorious. Yes, I think it was hashtag.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, that's busting my brain, because I'm like, okay. And I think we talked about this. To what degree? What does the process of sanctification look like? What's the degree to which the gospel transformation occurs, and why? Should we expect someone to be set free from same-sex attraction? Is that in its own self sinful, or something that needs correcting and whatever the right language is? So I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I keep saying, I think what helps me is to apply my expectations into other scenarios.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think, like, so if I just take away from homosexuality or anything like that, it's like, do I expect like someone who has neurodiversity?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, do we think, okay, neurodiversity means that you can't have that anymore, you need to fix that? If I can cope with someone who's got neurodiversity, as an example, struggling, however you want to phrase that, but you have someone who now also struggles with same-sex attraction.
Yes.
Why is that different? You know what I mean? And should I treat the individual differently in any way? Talking about, this person's actually not living out their, as I think David mentioned, like his distortion from the fall. He's not living that out by actually living in same-sex relationships at all. So he's actually denying himself. I mean, to me, I find that it's almost like he's taken away the complexity of, am I born this way? If I'm not born this way, it just doesn't, all that's almost put aside. And he's just like, this is as a result of the fall, and we all have our cross to bear in various forms. Yeah. And I think that's helped me kind of, personally feel like less, I don't know, what's the word? It's helped me to kind of make a bit more sense of it all. Because you're seeing somebody with living experience having that attitude, instead of me saying, you should have that attitude. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's helped me a bit.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because there are parallels and other things that are different, but there are things in life that cause suffering, and I'm not sure this is a right parallel, but this is a podcast and we can muse on it and talk, and you may disagree as you watch, but for example, physical sickness, let's take that one, or illness, that can bring a glory in its own right. But my expectation is when I see someone who's sick and they want to, and I'm praying for them, that God wants to heal them. Yeah. So it's kind of that degree to which the kingdom comes, and makes those distortions right. Yeah. It is a complex one in that scenario.
It's the only thing that he said when we had lunch together, which I felt helpful, is that because I kept thinking about going back to the pre-fall, so like the place of shalom. And of course he would say that's fine, but if you're saying go back to a place of like pre-fall to the shalom, as it were, to fix my sexual orientation in order for me now to get married, then he was like, well, it's because now again you think that the end goal is marriage. And that was now I don't know, because actually you could be a heterosexual person and still say single. So actually this thing about marriage and singleness, so I think there's a whole lot of conversations going on there, which is kind of like, it's interesting. I find it opens up a lot of avenues of discussion, which I think we haven't really explored before.
I don't know, this might be going off track a bit, but I also wonder whether opening these conversations has a spiritual impact. So from my perspective, I think we've opened something up, a conversation. I think numbers of us are wrestling with, how do I handle that? What do I think about? Probably some differences. But I think spiritually what happens is that people, therefore, from backgrounds like whether there's same-sex attraction going on or gay lifestyle or whatever, somehow I think it opens the door. I remember when we started to talk about diversity. So ethnic diversity. And we just had someone in and they taught us, and it's like, wow, it's
I remember,
And within a very short amount of time, people of colour started turning up.
So, which is great.
So we hadn't actually done anything other than as leaders started to talk about. So I think there's a foundational piece that we'll go on a journey, but it feels like being willing to have the conversation is a spiritual battle in its own right.
And this is, I think if that is a pattern of you have these conversations and more people turn up, I think one of the multiple reasons we're doing the series is that what do people experience when they come through our doors? Are they going to hit just a very cold Christianity, a judgmental, people, or they're going to receive open hands? And I think that's a big deal, isn't it?
It's massive, isn't it? As to how you feel. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think So I don't know, definitely learning. I mean, you've done a lot of reading around this, haven't you? And study.
It's definitely, I think, what's helped me in the series so far in the study is, before I did feel a bit more confused about. Confused is what's the right word? Like, I didn't think I had a thought through position. I just had more an emotional position. So in the past, I was like emotionally reacting against, well, don't, I'm going to call myself a man when I'm a woman, or vice versa, or whatever. Or I just had more emotional reactions against those things. Where now I think I feel more thought through about why I react in those ways, in relation to understanding what's happening in the culture, the processes required for a culture to think the way it does, or to behave the way it does. And for me, that was interesting is that not just that you have, this is one of the things that's interesting when we were reading about this expressive individualism stuff, is that it's not like, because you've always had in the culture individuals that would behave sort of outside of the norm, right? That's not unusual. Homosexualities, lesbianism, I mean, it goes back thousands and thousands of years. So it's not like it's unusual, or eunuchs, all those kind of things. The difference now is that the culture, the demand is that you should celebrate that difference, or that potential, like, call it something that is veered off what would deem as natural, to actually the culture requires you to celebrate it. And if you don't, then you are in a moral minority. That is the difference. That's what I think was made it so, I suppose, such an activist ideology, and that people are so reacting against it, or quite afraid to raise it in conversations, because you're going to come across not just as someone with a different opinion, you're going to come across as someone who was actually morally deficient.
Yes.
Which is really interesting, isn't it?
Very interesting.
So I find, I think in my narrow sort of bit, I think I feel a little bit more settled about what I think I understand, in the series.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I've noticed, because there's nothing really like the church, is it, to put people from all backgrounds and all generations in one pot and trying to get on. And I don't know, it just reminds me a little bit of when you sit around the meal table and you've got your kids when they're younger, but it's kind of, or even now, you think that there are differences of generational differences.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so I'm also conscious that there are those who are, for example, in our church, who are older, and actually some of this stuff, like for example, homosexuality was illegal. It's like, okay, so now I'm processing. I've got maybe a very clear evangelical view of how to see scripturally, but then someone's on the platform preaching and using language that I'm having to process, and so I've been fascinated to talk to some of the older generation, get a perspective there, and some of those who are younger, the millennials, you kind of, and my own generation think, it's almost like you've got all these generations trying to process something, and then think, how do I bring a biblical framework to this and then apply it pastorally? Really complex, especially when as a family you're trying to work this stuff out. And it's like sometimes, when you're a kid, your parents, you think they're just, what do they know?
Just miss some.
And so all of that stuff going on in the church, but we obviously got this governing thing over in terms of the Bible and those principles, and trying to work that out with grace and love and truth. So I found that I think these sort of conversations, I think, are causing us to have to go deeper as a family, maybe.
Yeah, that's good.
Work that stuff out. Culture of honor, which we talk a lot about. What's your value? Not just you're annoying me because you don't agree. I know we mentioned some of this, but these cultural frameworks of honor and authenticity, but being able to see the value in somebody who differs, really, really provoking.
It's good. I think probably the reactions, sometimes it happens, the reason why people have a strong reaction is because I think it's like, the interpretation is that you might be violating something in the gospel.
Okay, yeah.
Right? Do you know what I mean? And it's like, this is such a key thing, and we're potentially violating God. And then there's an emotional reaction, potentially an emotional reaction to it. But I think that's the point about listening and pausing, because actually, just because I'm having an emotional reaction doesn't mean that I'm actually right.
Yes.
I mean, my emotional reaction can't be the measure by whether I define whether something's right or wrong. And because Jesus, so I was thinking about this, Jesus caused massive emotional reactions. You know what I mean? Like, so he was quite happy to say things that people had reactions. So, for example, when he says, "Eat my body, and drink my blood," that's like.
That's a great response to that sermon.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? It's like, actually, people would have been like completely, and people walked away. And it's like, so I think like, so I suppose my thought is like, because I have emotional reactions all the time with things. I mean, even during David Bennett's, I'm sitting and thinking, oh no, this is, I'm feeling the emotions in the room, and I'm like in myself thinking, and then it's like, okay, hang on, Morné, you've got to just pause for a minute, and then you go through a process of self-reflection. It's like, actually, is that violating the gospel? Yeah. Why am I reacting the way I'm reacting? Is there anything here that just needs processing? And I think that's going to be helpful, isn't it? Because otherwise you make conclusions too quickly.
Yeah. So what are you doing when the emotional reaction comes? What's your go-to response to that? And how are you then getting to a place of bringing the Bible, bringing truth, and not burying it? What you do?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is, like, I'm generally asking myself the question, am I violating like just my personality? Is there something in my personality or my value system that is like being violated right now? And in Greg Harrison's book, A Better Story, this is clinical psychologist. He gives this analysis or an analogy of an elephant, and he says,
that's great.
And it's like, basically, this elephant is your emotions, and this example would be like, if someone says, and he uses like a horrible example where he says, if you, it's okay to have an orgy, right? And and he says, what you will first would happen is like the elephant has moved, and that's your emotions. It just shifts no matter what. It just has a automatic response. But he says on top sits reason.
Yes.
And it's only the reason, like, why is an orgy a problem? Like, why would that be a problem? You have to ask that question afterwards, and then depending on what reason tells you, you can reassess, you can kind of recalibrate the emotions back again, type thing. Yeah. Or you can say, no, actually, my emotions and my reason are in line with each other. Yeah. You see? Yeah. And I think what happens is sometimes our emotions and our reason, they separate. Right. So if someone says, for example, another one would be, I think, like a physical Bible is far better than an electronic Bible. Yeah. That is one thing, right? As an example, somebody's going to have a reaction to that. Somebody, no, it's not, or yes, it is. That's just an emotional response. Now, actually ask the question, like, give me a good, reasonable reason why a physical Bible is better than an electronic Bible. Yeah. Okay, and then you need to think about it and do the two line up or not. Yeah. And so I think,
very good.
You know what I mean? So I think, I'm trying to do this in reflection in all kinds of circumstances. Like, okay, here's something going on inside of me right now. My emotions reacted. Does that actually make sense? And then I want to come back to a place of like, okay, let me think about this, and then line myself up with the scriptures. And I think this is where I think generally when I think about like with a David Bennett context for me, and this is where I'm generally wrestling. I'm like, at what point, what does it look like to have a camp expression as a man?
Yes.
No matter whether you're on stage or not stage, it doesn't matter. Yeah. What do I think about that?
Yes.
Instead of just thinking, oh, I don't like it because it makes me feel uncomfortable.
So there's an emotional reaction to that.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable. Yeah. It makes me awkward. Blah blah blah. All that kind of stuff. Like, well, okay. So you acknowledge that. Yeah. But now apply some reason. Apply the Bible to that. And think of that through more carefully.
And I don't know about you, but where I'm going with that stuff in there's reaction. I don't always think that stuff through on my own.
Oh yeah.
So I'm saying, hey, Morné, or hey, I had this reaction, and I'm wondering about. Oh, I've seen it from this. So for me, it comes back to community.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's not sitting in a room and having a crack about it.
No.
Moaning about it. It's like genuinely trying to get to that place of being open enough to be challenged. I think you said it well on Sunday when you said holding a mirror up.
Yeah.
And thinking, actually, I'm responding out of an emotion that's linked to something else. Yeah. And the logic is this.
Yes.
So now I'm going to adjust myself.
Yeah.
And I think we call that discipleship.
I think so. Transformation.
And I can't do that on my own.
No.
I need honest people around me. Like, no, I think you're seeing that right. Or even if we're right, then
it's good.
So I think that's part of it.
But there's also some theological principles that I try to apply. So I had this conversation without digressing too much on transgender.
Yeah.
And someone said, if there's someone who's a transgender person, let's say it was a man that became a woman, surgically, right, and they become a Christian, do you expect them to detransition as a Christian now? And I'm like, talk about pastorally complex, right? Like, okay, so what do I think about that? So my emotions are all over the place. I don't actually really know, but now I'm starting to think theologically about it. Yeah. And like I said earlier, like one of the things that helps me is to try and push myself outside of that immediate example and somewhere else. So for example, so this might sound crazy, but let's say, let's just imagine, for example, in 300 years' time, 500 years' time, the way that the world is so different because of technology that you could, hypothetically, have been completely like bionics all over you. I chose different arms and legs, and I'm basically a robot with a torso. Just imagine, like, that's a silly example. I become a Christian. Yeah. Would I expect you to detransition to something?
Yes.
I mean, it's like a weird question. It sounds silly, doesn't it? But my point is, like, because the type of lifestyles and humans, how they're going to navigate themselves is going to be very different to what we have now. But biblical principles remain the same.
Yes. Yeah.
And because the Bible's still going to be relevant in 300 years' time, 1,000 years' time, if Jesus doesn't return. So you have to find a biblical principle that you know would even work potentially in the future. Yeah. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So like someone like if you now apply that to I'm not entirely sure that I think that your discipleship means that you must now go and I don't know what I think about it, but I'm not ready to just kind of make that sort of
Yeah.
like verdict so
Yeah.
quickly. It sounds almost too premature,
Yeah.
but it does. I think it helps me to moving it outside into other scenarios.
Yes, very good.
Because then I think it helps me look at it in a more rounded way than just my emotional reaction to something.
It's very good.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Then maybe it helps.
Yeah.
Maybe it helps.
I mean, the other
people
thing
don't know.
I found interesting in this process, Mick Taylor's session, which again I think that's online again, isn't it?
Yeah.
He brought, which I'd never thought about, but when the first missionaries went overseas and meet tribes where there's polygamy and they kind of try to make that completely, you know, biblical quickly.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think in summary, what it did for me is like, to what degree are we willing to live in the grey, and is that the compromising of the truth?
Yeah.
And how much room do we give to the Bible to outwork its own? It's powerful, right? The Word of God, in its own right, especially mixed with the Holy Spirit, to allow that to bring its own level of discipleship and people before we jump in and have to put it all. And I think that's going to be a challenge in our culture as to how much will we be able to live with. We should just sort them out, or let's absolutely, there's truth, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's going to be generational transformation. Maybe that, and that's what Mick, I think, was referring to. Maybe it should have taken a bit longer.
Yeah.
Because some of the implications of causing those families to split up was people were then in poverty.
Yeah,
and,
it's interesting.
And at risk.
Yeah, that was a really interesting example.
So,
and I do think, like, to your point, then I think what we're trying to do, in case anyone in our church is unsure, is that we are trying to, like a term we used, have an uncompromised orthodoxy. Hey, absolute staying on the truth. The Bible's everything.
Not going to move away from that.
Not moving away, all that stuff. Even though it might look a little bit like, surely the application of orthodoxy is tell the person that they have, you know, and like, well, I don't think that's quite what orthodoxy looks like, in the sense of like highlighting, instantly judging you and demanding your moral conformity. So moral conformity is different to heart transformation.
Agreed.
You know what I mean? So it's actually, or even adjusting your outside appearance to fit into something.
I think we call that religion.
Yeah, exactly. And it kills you, right? So we know. So it's like, so I'm like, no, let's be willing. It's like hold the line, I think, in a way. It's like we're holding the gospel line, but also hold the line in relation to discipleship. Jesus is like discipling people, and he's far wiser than us. So it's like in the wisdom of God, let people go on the journey.
Yeah, very good.
And see what happens. But I think we need a community that is able to be strong enough to hold that diversity.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's confidence, I think. It's confidence in each other that will hold the truth. Yeah. But we will have this uncompromising grace as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, how do we do that? The answer is I don't know. Someone asked a good question. What's the end of the journey look like? And I think you don't know, because it depends on where the person's starting from. So I think we know the end of the journey means we're going to be full of grace and truth. We know that. Yeah. But the detailed application of, so I think that the outcome isn't, oh, let's have a gay person preach once a year.
No.
That's not
the outcome.
That's not what we're talking about. But we are talking about how do we become more diverse, open-armed, able to cope with that level of things that are going on, which I think takes a greater degree of maturity. It takes a greater degree of rootedness in the truth, actually, to say we know where the line is, but we're holding. I think you do it with your own family. You know, you've got an arm around them. Right? You're not controlling. Yes. You are constantly saying, "Yes, I think this is what will cause you to flourish." Which this series has been about, isn't it?
I think so.
What causes humanity to flourish? That's been.
And the thing is, and for me, it's like, is God's story a better story for you?
Massive.
And that's a question only as an individual. It's like, do I really believe that God's story is a better story compared to the rest of the world living in? Because otherwise you won't proclaim it. Yeah.
And I think if there's, and there may be people who aren't even Christians yet watching this, right?
Yeah.
I think we would want you to hear that. We think there's a story of a God who loves you more than you can ever imagine, and it's going to cause you to flourish in a way that following the world's ways.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not a sport God, a God who's limiting. He's a God of expansive love.
No.
And he's calling people home to himself. So that kind of message, and how do we love you on that journey, however long that is.
Yes.
And that's
yeah.
So I think I'm personally just desperate for the diversity piece that stretches us. What does it look like when the married gay couple walk in And let's say they're both Christians or professing Christians at this point with kids.
Yes, yeah.
and all of this stuff,
Yeah.
you know, and thinking, okay, what's our response to that? Well, we're going to have to work it out.
We'll work it out
Yeah.
with the principles that we have in place.
Yes.
And that's the thing. There's truth, there's grace, there's conversations, there is no judgmental attitudes, and going on the journey. People are willing to go on the journey.
Yeah.
And I think that's the aim.
Wow.
And who knows what will happen. Okay.
Covered some ground there.
How long did we talk for? Anyway, half an hour. I hope you coped with that. I hope it's helpful. I think we will possibly do another one at the end of the series. We'll see how we go. But we've got a few more sessions coming up. So
brilliant. So what on Sunday you're covering another one of these?
Oh man, on Sunday I'm talking about the unique. I think I'm calling it like a beautiful partnership.
Great.
Right, between men and women, that God created men and women.
Brilliant.
In their uniqueness. So
great.
Pray for me.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you, Morné.
Bye.